We're joined by Christine Lagorio-Chafkin, senior reporter at Inc. Christine, great to have you with us on the show. Social media companies suspending Trump in light of the Capitol riots was just one of many ways that businesses stepped in. From your reporting, are you finding that these measures are perceived as alleviating political divisions or exacerbating them?
Well, I think it's a sign of the times. We would probably see some measure of this at any administration transition, any transition of power from one party to the other. But the events of the last 2 weeks certainly heightened the importance of it, and I think the storming of the Capitol certainly was this moment that caused CEOs at companies large and small to say it's time for us to take a stand for our democracy. And we saw so much action happen, not just from the big social media companies, but companies of all sizes, down to the Lyfts and Warby Parkers of the world were signing letters saying, hey, we need to ensure that this is an orderly transfer of power.
Christine, we've heard from many experts who have pointed out that these decisions by social platforms, for example, is not ideological, it's just business decisions, because when you have users and investors and advertisers speaking out, it makes sense for you to ban the person like President Trump, who is driving a lot of those views and revenue. Do you think these companies are ideologically driven at this point, or is it always going to end up being a business decision, and that is what their motivating factors are?
Well, I would say that it's worth looking at it as a business decision in that any kind of social unrest, any kind of political unrest is obviously terrible for business. That said, if you look at the social companies, say Twitter, look at Facebook, look at Google even, you've had employees who have become very much activists over the past year. They've been strengthened by the Black Lives Matter protests and have formed groups of concerned employees who have had their voices heard this year, who have been petitioning their management. And I think we saw, especially at Twitter over the past 2 weeks, employees were ready to speak out. They were ready to say, hey, we will not stand for this sort of violence being incited on our platform. And their voices, I think it got up to the moment where they were going to say something, and that's when Jack and the management did decide to ban Trump from Twitter. So you can see that force, and that's where I do think it's ideological, is when it comes from employees who were just fed up.
Yeah, Christine, one quick correction. We should note that we don't know yet if President Trump can post on Facebook, so just wanted to correct that quickly. But as we see, blocking of content of users on these platforms like Twitter and Facebook, we do see a lot of users now turning to more fringe sites like Parler, for example. But then you have Apple, Google, even Amazon blocking Parler itself. What are the implications and reactions to this kind of action happening to the mostly conservative site that is Parler?
Sure, and I think we'll see other fringe sites cut off as well. I think that when Twitter made its big move 2 weeks ago, it showed the other services like, hey, you can do this. It was really sort of a watershed moment, and they really every company, every Silicon Valley company that has user generated content stepped forth and said, Trump and anyone else inciting violence right now cannot post. And I think that Apple and Amazon being part of that, saying, you can't be on our cloud.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really interesting moment because it shows the power not only of those Silicon Valley companies to.
Yeah, Christine, sorry to interrupt you. Just want to break in here. We are seeing that President-elect Joe Biden has arrived at the Capitol. Soon to be President Joe Biden. You're seeing him arriving there. You can see Kamala Harris behind him, Doug, her husband, soon to be second gentleman, behind them as well, and Dr. Jill Biden. So his team has arrived at the Capitol. We're going to leave it there with Christine. That's Christine Lagorio-Chafkin, senior reporter at Inc.